Good everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'm going to talk about error handling. So the first thing first, right? You need to register for an org if you haven't done so. So I logged into my org. So let's jump into Developer Console. So the way to go to Developer Console, you go to the scarecrow icon at the top right hand corner and go to Developer Console. Okay. Right now, why do we need to do error handling, right? And what is this error handling is all about at first place, right? You might wonder. So when you write a piece of a code, right, any piece of a code, it's very important that you capture those errors, right? You can have an error in your code for whatever reason. Let's say you're trying to get an information from a so-called object, and then for whatever reason that information didn't get populated, and then you assume that, oh, okay, I will get this data and then I'm going to use it, right? So, and in that case, that obviously will throw an error, and so that error needs to be captured because last thing you want, to develop an application or develop a functionality, and when something goes wrong, right? User has no idea what's happened behind, what happened behind the scene, right? So, I mean, ideally speaking, users shouldn't be bothered with what's going on behind the scene, but at least it will be good to know if things go wrong in the form of an error message or logging or something, right? So we're not going to talk about logging, custom logging, or other logging that we're going to talk about way later, right? So today I just want to teach you how to write a good code, right? Code which contain a try and a catch block, right? Which plays a very important role. So let's go to our developer, anonymous window. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I will um, pretend, right? This is a method. So you remember that I talked about a methods, right? Where you talk about public, right? Void. Um, okay. Let's write a method here, anyways. Okay. Get a test error. Okay. So something like this. Okay. I'm just saying you do method like this. Okay. So usually it's a best practice, right? You try to encapsulate this in between try and catch. Okay. So what happens is, I will explain to you what I'm doing here. So any kind of operation you do, it's better to put under try catch. I mean, depending upon the scenario, right? But most of the time, it's good to put under try catch, right? But if you're just doing something like, say, what's that called? Integer A. You don't need to put integer A in the try catch, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? If this is what it's all only doing, or if you say just return true, you don't have to put this in under a try catch, because if it's just a single statement, because there won't be an exception, right? So if you're doing a complex calculation, right, if you're getting something from a database, or if you're dealing with a list or collection, then it's very important you deal with um, uh, error handling. Okay, so the most common error handling, I want to talk about the DML exception. So DML exception is, right, when you create, when you do any kind of insert update operation on a so-called object. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to create a new contact. Okay, you can do that using a code. So things can go wrong when you create a new contact, right? Because you need to have few fields mandatory, right? First of all, it's the last field, last name is mandatory, right? So for say, let's say, for whatever scenario or whatever reason, uh, the last name turns out to be blank, or sorry, or null, right? So in that case, it will throw an exception. Okay, and the user has to know that there is an exception happened, right? So the way to do that, you capture it using an error, using a catch block. Okay, so the catch is for capturing the exception. So you do everything on the try. It's like, let me try something, right? And when things go wrong, just jump into the catch. Okay, this is exactly a simple analogy, right? You do everything under the try block. Okay, everything under the try block. You see, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that. When things go wrong, right? It will get routed to the catch block. Okay, so let me do a very simple example. Okay, contact object. So contact. So this is the API name of a contact. Okay, and you say C equals to new contact. Okay, this is how you create a new custom, new object if you wanted to do an instance of a new object, so far whatever you learned, you would know that how to create an object, right? Okay, so contact is a data type, okay, of an S object, and then C is the name of a variable. You just give a meaningful name, whatever you want. You can say cont, okay. Now, to insert a data, okay, to insert a data into an S object, you use the command called insert, okay, and you say cont, okay. That's great. So if you wanted to update, you do update, okay. If you wanted to delete, you do delete. So we're gonna deal with that stuff later when we deal with insert update operation, right? It's very important for you guys to know that. Okay, so now what kind of exceptions we have? We have different kind of exceptions here, okay? Different kind of exceptions type, okay? So we have, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take this block off, okay? I don't want to put this in a method for now, but you get the idea, right? This is how you write inside a method, okay? So we have following kinds of exception here. So let me put that one for you here. So we have simple exception type, okay, right? And then we have DML exception, okay. Then we have list exception, okay. Let me type it. This is too much. Sorry about that. It just sometimes this keyword is crap. List exception, and then we have null pointer exception, okay, and then we have query exception, okay. So what we're going to do today, we're going to cover a little, not everything, because I just wanted you guys to give some time to digest what I'm going to talk today, right? Because it's important you guys understand and play with it, so that it becomes your muscle memory, so that you guys know when to use it when things go wrong, right? And so you need to use the right exception type so that it captures it, okay? I mean, if you wanted to have a specific one, okay. So in this case, it's a DML operation, right? DML, because you're modifying it, okay, creating it. So what we're gonna do, so we're gonna declare here DML, okay, and we're gonna do DML exception. Oh, come on. And you're gonna do something like the exception. So I've declared the DML exception of type DML exception here, and this is the variable name, okay. And then you're gonna do system.debug, okay, and then you can put exp.getMessage. So this is the method of this exception class, DML exception class, a get message, which actually returns you the error message, okay. So I'll explain to you what I've done so far, okay. So this is we are trying to create a new contact, and then we inserting it, okay. So I've intentionally missed out adding first name last name here, okay, just to show you what happens when you try to create a contact with no first name last name, okay. And then I wanted to make sure that these exceptions are captured using an exception type DML exception, okay. So that's why I have a catch block. So whenever there's an exception happens, right, if you put your code inside try catch, it will throw the stuff to catch, right? So the code will hit here, okay. So the way it works, first it execute the line number 9, okay, then it comes here, then line number 11, okay, then it try to insert here. Then let's say if I have a new statement here, okay, say cont account a. Right, let me do the simple one first, then we get into the complex, okay. So it will throw an error here and we'll jump here, okay. Let's run it. Let's see the debug. You see, the insert failed. First exception required missing field. Last name is mandatory, right? So you haven't specified in the last name, okay? So it failed, okay? So now let me, sorry, not the terminal here. Right, so what we're gonna do, so now we will do this, okay? We do cont dot last name equals to test. Okay, test one. Okay, right. So let me run it now. Tell me about it. What happens? Okay. Now I've added the last name. Okay, and now let's see what happens. Okay. So there's no exception because it worked. Uh, so what happens is, right, in this case, you try to create a contact, okay? And I said, okay, I wanted to populate the contact with just one mandatory field. That's the last name, which is correct because that's the mandatory field. And then you do the insert. So in this case, we have not encountered any error. So when there are no errors, right, the catch block will never get executed. This catch is only if something goes wrong, right? What if something happens? That kind of scenario, okay? I mean, in a good day, in a good scenario, the catch will never get executed, okay? So let me delete this one, okay? And then I'll show you what happens. One more code. So let me create an account here, okay? Just an account statement, okay? Now, tell me one thing. In this scenario, will the line number 14 get executed? Let's say, or let's say, you know. Now, we have a scenario here where contact will fail. So when the contact will fail, do you think that this account debug information will be displayed? Let's find out. Oh, sorry, that's forgot to put that one. Okay. You see that account debug information is not getting populated. The reason why, when there is an exception happens, right, here, because it's trying to insert a data, okay, so it fails. When it fails, it skips the line number 14, 15, or whatever after that. It straight away jumps to the catch statement and execute line number 20, okay? So let me say I wanted to add the last name here, okay? So I'll say last name equals to Tuborg, okay? So it's the name of a, it's a good Danish beer, so, Copenhagen. So you go there, and so you go here and then say account, okay? The reason why it's populating, it's displaying account, because the code is doing exactly what you're supposed to do, right? It's working correctly, right? So that's why it's not triggering the catch side of the code, okay? So you need to understand this, right? Because it's an interesting concept and it's very important at the same time, right? I know that if it's new for you, you might find it a little bit trickier. It's similar, like um, uh, if something goes wrong, right, you have something to fall back onto, okay? So it's like a similar analogy. If something goes wrong, it jumps into catch, okay? And say, look, something has gone wrong, okay? And I'm not going to continue anymore, okay? So that's how it works. So I'm going to talk about a second kind of exception. That's list exception. So list exceptions is pretty straightforward. So let's create a list, okay? Or you can do set, okay? Let's create a list of string, okay? And I say lst equals a new list of string. Okay, now so the list exception, instead of DML exception, because we are not doing anything to DML here, so this is the list exception. When something to do with the list breaks, okay, when something to do with the collection that breaks, it throws an exception here, okay? So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm saying list, okay, so we're going to say list 0 system dot debug. Let's say I'm trying to access the 0th element of the list, okay? Because right now I've only created the list, but the list is null, it's blank. it do not contain any any element, right? So, but what we're trying to do, we assume that okay, list contains an element, but whereas the code tells you that there is not even a single element inside the list. So what will happen? It will break. It will throw an exception. So any exception to do with list will be captured by this one. Okay. So let's run it. You see, list index out of bounds. It's a very common error message. Okay. Now how to solve it? So just pretty straightforward. So I say lst.add. So a, because I'm adding an item to the list, right? Now, see. Oh, sorry. I just have to be list because I'm trying to access the data type to add. Okay, so now when you do debug, see, you got A, right? Because you want to get an exception, but instead you get A because that's exactly what you wanted to show, that you want to display the first zeroth element of the list, which is A, okay? But it didn't hit the catch block, okay? So that's how normally the try catch works most of the time. I mean, in every single time, right? So if there is an exception, it will jump into the catch block, right? Depending upon the exception type you define. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about null pointer exception, then query exception, then how to use different catch statement, in a single block, okay, in a single try. And then we're going to talk about final block, okay, try final. So it's important that you guys understand this concept because you will encounter a lot of code with try catch. I mean, I do not like to see a code which do not contain try catch if it is doing a complex expression, right? Unless they have other way of capturing an error. But if I see a code which contains no error handling whatsoever, I call it as a crappy code, right? Because we can't be politically correct every single time, right? If someone writes a crappy code, you have to tell that person, look, this code is crap, because it's going to cause problems for you and the company in the long run, right? Because you will encounter issues and you will not know what's going on and where to look for it, right? So that's why error handling is very, very important, right? This is very critical for me. As a part of my code review, I see you doing a complex operation in a method and there's no freaking error handling, I'm going to reject the code straight away, right? It needs to have some error handling, some logging, okay, when things go wrong, okay? So what we learned today, we talked about error handling, right? So think about a class, have a method, okay? Inside a method, you have a complex operation, right? Doing something, right? So please make sure you try to include that in the try catch, and we're going to talk about final section as well, finally, okay? So that's tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, whenever I cover that, okay? So this is very straightforward, okay? So things go wrong for whatever reason, right? Like I demonstrated that you wanted to create a contact, but for whatever reason, you decided not to, assign anything to the last name. So that's one of the mandatory fields when it comes to contact. So contact failed, right? So when that happens, right, it's your responsibility to let the user or to capture the error somewhere. The way to do that is to write a try catch, and the catch is where you actually get the information, right? Error information, okay? So get message is one of the method of a exception class, right? So, and then we talked about the list exception, right? DML exceptions are list exceptions when you do with collections list, right? When something goes wrong associated with the list, it throws the list exception, okay? And when we talk about DML exceptions, any kind of DML operation, right? Insert, update, right? So it's good to put under DML exceptions, right? Then we have, other exceptions type. Query exceptions, if you're getting a query from a database, things go wrong, so that's the best place to do that. Null pointer exceptions when you're trying to access a null value, right? That's what the null pointer exception. But I'm going to talk about this in next episode, right? So yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about today. So I hope you have a great day. Greetings and adios.